Hello, I'm Keith Johnston, your host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, we're joined by Vice Presidents and Senior Research Directors Matt Guarini and Fred Gueron to discuss a few of our 2024 predictions for technology leaders. Welcome both.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Keith. Good to be here.
All right, guys, it's always an exciting year, particularly for tech leaders. Just like last year, tech leaders, they are the ones that aren't going to be starving for budget, and there's a lot of opportunity for technology. In this case, in 2024, lots of predictions around talent, which is pretty tricky right now. Again, the technology's leader involvement in growth, and of course, AI. But just to kick it off, the big overall theme was just even with those growth initiatives that winning with AI is about giving your operations an epic boost. So let's start out with the growth part of it before we delve into AI. And let's talk about your first prediction, which you're saying that in the case of technology leaders, their role in driving growth, which we've discussed many years, only 10% of them are going to get it right in 2024. So why so few? And let's really get into what's it mean to getting growth right.
There's a few things here when we talk about growth. The first thing is you've got to recognize growth for what's important to your business. A lot of times when we do research, we automatically think about the private sector, and growth can be customer growth. It can be profit growth. But even for the public sector, growth is an aspiration that we all have. We all aspire to grow the ability to deliver more services for citizens, customers at a better price point, right? And then ultimately, we also want to deliver a better service. So when we talk about growth, it's in the eye of the beholder. And what we really are looking for is the CIO has a greater opportunity than ever before to play this role of growth. And the reason being, it's technology. And so your ability to deliver great technology is much more linked to that great growth. One of the big data points that we have is that companies that can highly align their marketing, their CX, and their digital, they report up to 2.4 times higher revenue growth. So this ability to get the tech aligned with the business strategy is a key recipe for your future success.
And I think just to add on that, in terms of your question, Keith, how do you get growth right? I think at the core, when we think about getting growth right, it's about orchestrating different technology initiatives that will directly contribute to what Matt was talking about in terms of either sustained business expansion or being able, from a public sector perspective, offering more services at a more competitive price point and delivering better experiences. And we have identified these three vectors that we talked about in a previous podcast episode. In terms of the vectors of growth, right? How do you enable growth? How do you create growth? And how do you amplify growth? Happy to go into more details on that, but that's really how we think about getting growth right from a CIO perspective.
I'd like to dig in that just a little bit more. Is Matt, what you said about, growth is in the eye of the beholder. And so I don't want our audience to think that, growth is all about revenue because, or a little bit more consumer facing, because growth means different things for different people. And we've talked about growth as being those revenue drivers and growing companies and getting scale. But it's also about IT just having an impact, allowing the company to perform faster or better. I mean, that's inside of growth too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is all about, that definition. And so when you go look at like a lot of the data that we're seeing on the AI side of things, a lot of what we're looking at is people's objectives for how they're using AI to grow the firm. Sometimes it's to increase productivity. We see that a lot. It's very common between both CIOs and CTOs to want to drive increased productivity. The other things that you'll start to see, efficiency and effectiveness, primary outcomes that CIOs and CTOs are trying to drive across the organization. So these are all elements of growth. It's how you help your employees do more. It's how you increase the capacity of your company. And therefore, how does that increase in capacity help you drive greater impacts?
So, I mean, it helps to take a look at maybe some of the data that we've recently collected. And about a month ago, we got the data from our software survey. It's a global survey. We interviewed more than 4,000 software decision makers. And one of the questions that we ask in the survey is, what are the biggest challenges your organization face when executing its software strategy? Top two, not really surprising. One is around budget. The second one is around security. But then as you go down the options, you see some really important barriers that stand in the way of getting this growth agenda right for CIOs and their team. The first and most important is lack of alignment between IT and business. Then you have things like cost of replacing legacy systems. You have, inflexibility of existing application. You have the technical debt diverting energy away from innovation. So there's not just one barrier to getting this growth agenda right. It's a multiplicity of challenges, and that's what's making this very, very complex for 90% of the organizations.
So when we get this data back, we always have to find what success looks like. So given some of the inputs and some of the things that that those who are getting growth right should be doing or are doing, are there some examples? Who is that 10% that technology leaders can actually look to maybe see themselves in it?
I mean, in the research that we have done over the past 12 months on this, the role of the CIO in the growth agenda, we've come across some really interesting success stories. One of them is a large insurance provider that is undergoing a significant business transformation, technology-enabled business transformation. And the CIO was telling me how they had an anecdote as they were about to launch this business, to kick off this business transformation. One of the country CEO for the company came up to this CIO in Singapore and said, technology is becoming the engine of the company. You're not IT, you're a business consultant to me. So you see, example of these organizations where there's a very strong proximity and a very strong alignment in between business stakeholders and the technology leaders. And this strategic alignment, where both from a business strategy perspective and technology strategy perspective, is, I believe, one of the first things that organizations need to strive and do in order to get started on, closing the gap, to bridge this gap for the 90% of the companies that won't get it right in 2024.
All right, so 2 of the predictions out of the 5 were all about talent. But before we get into the predictions, maybe we can just take a look at where is the talent crunch, perhaps. What does it look like around the regions? Because we're getting new data now that attrition is at an all-time low, even though we see talent deficits, or perhaps it's skill deficits. So much for the Great Resignation, when it comes to the low attrition. Where are we at in the talent situation? And let's run around the globe, because I don't think it's the same everywhere.
From a U.S. perspective, the market had definitely been one where, talent hard to come by. We heard for months and months that a lot of these reductions were in the tech sector. But when we dove behind and looked at the details, we were finding it wasn't so much that the real tech roles were the ones going. It was the people that were supporting those folks, the marketing, the sales roles around tech. Things have started to change. We're at a point, we just missed on the job numbers, right? It was the first miss in a while. It does feel, and some of our data and our tier research is starting to show some of that slowing. One of the big things that we see regionally, when you look at AI jobs, there's a couple of markets that are the dominant places for the AI jobs. Silicon Valley is a big one, DC, New York, the places you would expect. When you get outside of those areas, you're going to run into challenges. But what we still are working with a lot of folks on is how do you build a tech strategy that enables you to leverage some of these other markets where there's real opportunity. And, some of the markets that people most turn to, Nashville is one, but we're seeing a lot of data that shows Nashville, a lot of the advantages in terms of the talent and the pricing has started to erode. So it's important that tech execs start to think about that. And another factor of it is, what is your hybrid strategy or your future of work strategy? Because the tech employee tends to have a much more willing to be remote or work in that hybrid than any other workers that we typically see out there. So when you look at that, if you don't have that flexibility, you're really going to be challenged if you don't work in one of these markets that have good fundamentals for labor.
So Fred, what's going on in Asia Pacific?
Yeah, Asia Pacific is a little bit different. We are witnessing a little bit of slowing dynamics, I guess, in terms of macroeconomic point of view, especially in markets like Australia. But otherwise, the growth rate is going to be pretty solid, still pretty robust across Asia Pacific markets, and without a healthy growth from a technology spending perspective. That's the backdrop for a still very, very tense talent talent market in the region. We were at our Technology and Innovation Forum last week in Sydney, and you could hear technology leaders talk about some of the challenges that they have recruiting skill set around data, of course, artificial intelligence, cloud native, and others, right? And this is making it very, very difficult for them to execute on some of their transformation strategies. So, slightly softer economic environment. The tech spending is quite resilient, and that explains also a quite a tense situation on the talent side across Asia Pacific.
So you really articulated a lot of the inputs to the next prediction. So I'll just say the prediction, and then maybe you guys can just give me some color behind it, which is enterprise AI initiatives will boost productivity and creative problem solving by 50%. What I love about this one is we're talking about AI or Gen AI. It may not be the most interesting or sexiest of things, if you will, but in an economy where we're flat or maybe not a whole lot of growth, like you're talking about AI initiatives that are going to get right into making employees more productive, opening up the aperture to margins. Get into that a bit.
So one thing that we looked at, trying to understand the impact of generative AI on some of the operations of organization across public and private sector, is to look at, for instance, the software development, functions and processes, and we basically started looking at the largest employers of developers, right? And these are the large service providers. Accentures and Deloitte and TCS, Infosys, and the likes, right? And trying to get a good idea in terms of how are they changing their service delivery and operating model because of Gen AI. And we found some really interesting insights and data points that supported some of the trends that we've been talking about for a number of years around Turing bots, and the fact that software developers will be leveraging a lot more artificial intelligence, as these Turing bots, in order to help them develop software, but also test software, design software, and so on and so on. And the productivity improvements are quite significant. We're talking about 15 to 20% productivity improvements in 2024. I mean, that's what these companies are expecting for their software developers. Now, the key question, and one question that I like to ask our CIO clients is that, if you are able to generate 20% from your software developers and maybe other functions within your teams, what are you going to do with it? Right? I think that's a really important question, right? Because yes, this is productivity improvement, but you have two ways of defining productivity. Productivity is either keeping the same output with a lower input, or augmenting your output with the same input, right? So you have a choice, and I think you have an obligation as a technology leader to choose how you're going to leverage the power of these technologies. What we wanted to highlight in this particular prediction is the fact that there's an opportunity to empower the developers that are arguably one of the most creative teams or community within organization, with more time to address more complex problems, right? Because they can spend less time on the more mundane task of the software development lifecycle. For instance, I mean, if we just focus on software developers, but I think what we really wanted to highlight here is the fact that the leaders have an opportunity and probably an obligation to really think hard about how they're going to utilize these productivity improvements, and hopefully this is going to be about allowing their teams to be more creative.
And overall, I mean, you guys are talking about creativity a lot in our tech research, but we're talking about AI is actually going to open up the opportunity for more technology-focused talent to be more creative, right? When they may have not had the opportunity before.
Yeah, I think, Keith, a couple of things. One thing I'd add specific to your question, then I want to come back to one of Fred's. To your question, when you look at the ability to be creative, the statistics, especially when you go into the innovation realm, a lot of people will say, this was an old P&G metric, that they used to want to see that, 1 in 10 of their innovation projects would hit, but it would have a 10x return. And if you did that math, they would break even. But they knew that they would hit on more than 1 in 10, and they knew they would get things that were more than 10x. So they were getting really positive returns, and they were one of the great innovators. When you think about how people can create more at-bats within technology, right? It's the same thing the agencies are doing, something I know you know very well. The agencies with all these technologies are able to, put together more campaigns in faster time. Well, that's what Fred's talking about. Now, multiply that across your tech org, and now you start to see that ability. So we have seen some people trying to restrict AI. Our view on it is, hey, don't restrict it, promote it. Put some guardrails on it. We've got some research that we call BYO AI. It's all on the premise of BYOD, when we all wanted to bring our own cell phones. What happened? We all resisted. But now we're at a point, most companies allow it, and people get more value out of it. Same thing's going to happen with AI. Think about how you can take advantage of it with the guardrails, but use it in such a way that not only your software developers, but the folks in infrastructure, your enterprise architects, how can each of these teams use it to be able to look at more options, to come up with new solutions that they previously didn't consider? That's what's going to drive that headline creativity. And then if you can harness that, you can use that to go back to what we talked about, the growth. Now, one thing that I wanted to come back to on Fred, we were just looking at some data this morning from one of our surveys, and it was a question on what do you see as some of the primary outputs for AI? And CIOs and CTOs, looking at those two segments, both of them had their top two choices around driving customer experiences and driving revenue growth. Fantastic. That's the growth we talked about. But one of the spots where we saw a marked difference was reduce the workforce. Now, there are some really interesting ways to look at that, right? But at one level, is it the CIO is just thinking about, hey, I'm going to build all these great solutions and everything, and we're going to go and drive that revenue growth with the base that we have? Or is it the CTO camp thinking, well, we can go do all this productivity, make people more valuable, but get rid of a bunch? I don't know which wins in that. That's one of those that we're going to have to see. But, thinking about what those ultimate value drivers of how you're going to implement these solutions and capture the value, becomes really important as you look at your growth agenda.
But I would also point back to this idea that at least in Asia Pacific, tech spending is still going to grow, right? So in spite of all these things that we're talking about, and we're quite optimistic about, cautiously optimistic, but still optimistic about the fact that tech spending will grow next year, which means that CIOs will also continue to recruit and to grow their teams. So as long as there's a clarity, in the strategic alignment in between the business strategic objective and the technology strategy, looking back again to the growth agenda, I think we'll see the ability also for these discerning CIOs to use this productivity to accelerate and amplify the growth of their initiatives.
So just to summarize, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for AI. Some tech leaders may be looking to trim their staffs. Others need to grow them. And our data says that they're going to, we need more talent, not less, at least over the next 3 years. Talk about the next prediction that was aligned with talent.
Yeah, so the big prediction here, Keith, that we want to highlight is the concept of shadow HR. This is almost, a little bit of turnabout for the CIO, and it might not be a good thing. So we've lamented for years the concept of shadow IT. It really came to a head during the cloud era, right, where people could use a credit card to get capabilities. What we're starting to see is that in the marketplace right now, that when the tech exec is going to their HR partner, they need to identify different skills. They're much more rapidly changing. And so some of the structures that are being used by chief people officers aren't always adaptive enough for building the right skills in your tech org. So we are starting to see that some of these companies are starting to get rid of the ways that they're currently working, really changing the way they bring in talent. But if you can't get that HR business partner, that chief people officer to come along, we are starting to see some leaders that are going their own way. And that starts to create shadow HR. Now, in some cases, it can be done with little impact, but we could see it drive a real schism between that HR team and the IT team. And once you get to that, it's never good for anyone. So, the real advice here when we look at it is to really start to think about what's important, how you identify this, and then partner with that HR team and your other talent partners to really think about how you change job descriptions, how you think more about skills assessments, how you build upskilling paths once you bring them in. There's all different things here that really have to come in that may be different than that's being currently used, but they're things that, if done right, are going to change the way that you bring talent in, and hopefully you can avoid any of these challenges that a thing like shadow HR can bring.
So, Matt, to your point about talent, we have this I don't know, this friction in the sense that we're going to need more talent, more different kind of talent now. AI is going to accelerate a need for a skill set now, yet a new skill set that we don't have. Our tendency to solve this is to go with outside partners. Now, you guys talk about how the tech execs will just do that. They'll try to fill the AI skills gap, but they may be putting their internal talent at risk. They may be depleting their skills because, if you don't find the balance, you could end up relying too much on partners. Tell us about that prediction.
Yeah, Keith, this is one of the ones that we're seeing right now, that the speed at which people are trying to adopt generative AI and other AI. Our Pulse survey back in the summer showed that over 50%, I think the number is 54% of companies are either expanding or experimenting with AI. So it's out there. Everybody's doing it. The challenge is if you don't have those skills internally, people are turning to the service providers. Another data point that we have that shows that 75% of companies are investing more than 1% of their budget on AI and ML service providers. That number goes over 5% for like 39% of the companies. So loads of investment going into those partners. And it's great to get the solution up and running. But if you don't create the structures to take the learnings from that and build your own teams, you're going to be stuck in this loop where you're going to get more and more dependent on the service provider. One of the big things we like to talk about is the idea of co-creating. How do you work with these partners to innovate? And if you're not building that dynamic, you're never going to get the value out of that innovation. So, it's okay if you need to go to that partner now, but use it as an opportunity to learn from them, build those skills, go back to what I talked about before. How do you upskill people over a period of time? How do you build great employee experiences? By giving them the ability to work with technology. These are the things you have to focus on to get the value out of working with these service partners. If you don't, you may get some of the early returns, but I don't think you're going to get long-term success.
We got some tough ingredients, though, too, in 2024, don't we? I mean, if the economy stays a little rocky and people are starting to reduce headcount to trim up their operations and get some margin back while we're investing in all these service partners, for their talent, I mean, what happens? I mean, in 2024, is 2025 all about trying to hire your people back, and get smart because you've leaned in too heavily to these partners?
I think the amount of work that is required for the vast majority of companies to get their data house in order, to build the capabilities that they will need to operate these, successfully operate these technologies like artificial intelligence and generative AI, is going to take much more than just a couple of years, right? So this is something that it's a journey that if luckily you're part of an organization that has started on this data transformation journey a few years ago, you are in a good position. If you have not, it's urgent for you to be starting, because otherwise you're gonna become very quickly a laggard. And that's where I think, given the massive investment that these service providers, like the literally $1 billion of investments that these service providers have made just in 2023 to, create new skills, to create new partnership, to create new assets, new accelerators that they are going to leverage to help you accelerate your own transformation. I think this is too good to pass on. Now, I think Matt is absolutely right. That's probably a good opportunity to try and catch up with the leading companies that have already started on this transformation. But at the same time, you need to think very, very seriously about developing your own internal capabilities, along this journey, to make sure that you have a sustainable way to build and operate and evolve these AI capabilities in the long run.
So in some ways, you guys' prediction is a bit of a warning to technology executives that there's more than enough work to go around, but make sure that you keep your in-house talent situation in order. So this has been great, guys, but I always like to ask the question. We have lots of input, and this year it was all about, again, the economy and AI and geopolitical pressures and, all the things. And there's more than 5 predictions out there. So if each of you could just offer us maybe just a little insight, what fell on the cutting room floor this year, what was number 6, if you will, or what might be, we're just a little bit ahead of the curve, and maybe give a sneak peek to something we might be calling in 2025.
Yeah, I'll take the first crack here. And I'm going to do this one on one that fell on the floor, but then it popped up somewhere else. I'll start with what popped up. It popped up in another team of ours. And what they found, or what they predicted, is that 90% of companies will modernize their core to handle their Gen AI software commitments. And the reason that I wanted to flag this one, that's hey, we know what we have. We know we have to do a lot of this investing in software. We know we need a lot of providers. It's what we've been talking about through the earlier parts of this conversation. But when we originally did this work, one of the ones that fell on the floor was this massive need for tech shops to get their houses in order, and then also to be able to find the incremental funds to invest. And so we had one that we were talking about this big rationalization of the core of the tech stack, and then using that to reinvest in the future. And so, it was really interesting that the other team went this direction. Theirs was much more specific just to the Gen I. We were looking at the bigger picture, but I do think this is one that's going to be a central issue. It's one that we covered at our forum. We have a whole team focused on this. Really this opportunity, we haven't reduced technical debt. We've grown it, if anything. I think the same thing's going to happen in this current moment that we're in. We're moving so fast, making so many investments. I don't know if we're making them as efficiently as we should. So tech debt, I presume, is going to go up. So how do I think about rationalizing that core while the plane's flying, and then use that to reinvest appropriately to make sure I'm driving that future growth we want to get to?
Yeah, the one you're talking about was in the enterprise software predictions, where they've basically said that because of AI, this is going to be the big moment where you need to rationalize your entire suite of enterprise apps and get your data in order to even leverage these technologies.
Yep, exactly right, Keith.
So, Fred, what about you?
Well, I think, we talk a lot about AI and generative AI, but there's one area from an automation perspective that's probably going to have also a massive impact on automation initiatives from organization across the globe, is this focus on process intelligence. So you're thinking about, process mining, task mining, and the fact that artificial intelligence is indeed getting its way into some of these automation technologies, and going to be really helpful for organizations that are trying to scale their automation, their process automation initiatives across their organization. So our prediction is that over half of enterprises will target end-to-end automation with a process intelligence in 2024. And for this company, that's going to be a game changer.
Great. Well, this is fun, guys. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Matt. 2024 predictions for the tech exec. All right. We'll see you next year.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Keith. It was great being here.
To read more of our 2024 predictions, visit Forrester.com/predictions. And be sure to join us on January 18th for a live webinar where we'll do a deep dive into even more of our predictions for the year ahead. Thanks for listening.